Good morning, everybody. My name's Nancy Barrett, and I'm the Director of Creative Scene. And really warm welcome to you today. It's great to see so many people in this day when everybody's a little bit zoomed out, I'm sure. But for everybody to give some time to come and have this conversation is really brilliant. And we're really pleased to welcome such a diverse group of people along today. So I'm sort of hosting Creating the Space today, but we've got a fantastic panel of speakers. On my screen, they all appear at the top. I'm going to give a little bit more of an introduction as we go through the agenda today. But first of all, welcome to, excuse me, Anna Franks, who's our Audience Development Associate, who's helped plan the event with us. Anna's going to be going through the chat and trying to moderate that a little bit and feedback in from the chat. And also welcome hi to Sarah Sherwood, who is our Audience Development Manager at Creative Scene there as well. So Anna's also going to keep an eye on the time because I'm notoriously bad at managing time. So Anna, do sort of wave at me. We've got a little bit over an hour to go through the agenda, so we're hoping for lots of rich discussion. We might veer off a little bit, but we'll try and keep to the order. Hi to Matt there, Matt Worden. Matt is an artist, and Matt is doing visual notes from the meeting. So he'll give us a little preview at the end, and we'll have a look at those. We'll share those after this meeting. A few housekeeping points to start. So we're not planning a comfort break. If you want to go out the room, go to the loo, make a cup of tea, whatever, just feel free to do that when it's convenient. Turn your camera on or off, whatever you feel that you need to do. We are on Twitter and Insta and encouraging people to use the hashtags. I think Sarah is going to pop that into the chat now. And we've also got captioning by clear text. It's available by clicking on CC or more in your toolbar there and selecting show subtitle. Is that right, Sarah? So that if you need some extra support through clear text captioning, that's available. We are recording the discussion today and we'll be posting it online after the event for people who weren't able to join. So if you don't want to be seen, you can stop your video now and just continue to listen along. And if you haven't already, you can purchase a copy of Parking a Poem in a Biscuit Factory on our website. And of course, this is what we're going to kick off to today. Yay! Who else has got a book there? Fantastic. Len Grant is the artist, storyteller, photographer, illustrator whose book we're launching today. Hi to you there, Len.
Hello.
Hello. So, I think that's the general housekeeping. So I just wanted to take just a couple of minutes, really, just to tell you a little bit about Creative Scene and what's behind the programme and the book that we're launching today. So Creative Scene is one of Arts Council England's Creative People and Places projects. There's now about 30 Creative People and Places projects nationally, and most of them are in areas of disadvantage or challenge. Most of them are in tier 3 of lockdown, and I don't think that is a coincidence. A vast proportion of them are in the north. And they're all areas that I think have been overlooked by culture and haven't really developed a cultural ecology in the same way as some of the bigger cities or some more prosperous regions. And so the Creative People and Places programme set out by Arts Council to try and find different ways of engaging the public with arts and creativity. We're an action research based programme, so that means that we try out things, see what works, and then adapt them into our programmes. Being in North Kirklees, it's an area between Leeds and Bradford and Huddersfield, but not really connected to those areas. It's a former industrial area, formerly of textiles, a very diverse area, and with very little infrastructure for the arts. So there's no professional art centre, there's a couple of local authority museums, but it's not very well known as a place for artists. And we've been working for the last 6 years to try and bring arts out onto the streets, out into everyday life, and create opportunities for people to engage at the point where they are, whether that is a shopping centre or a local park or the town hall or in community centres. And we've had a lot of success built up over 6 or 7 years now. We're looking to the next 3 years because we will be funded through to 2024 and to an exciting future after that, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later on. So we've been asking as we go through this programme, you know, what does an arts ecology need to look like in an area like this? Why are people not so engaged in the arts, and how can we create the conditions for creativity to flourish? What do we need to support? So we've been looking at the different spaces, the different venues, the different kinds of people we need to get involved in having both the conversations, in developing cultural leadership, and in supporting co-construction of arts projects. So we work with a lot of festivals, community centres. We work with a network of pubs who help us programme and put on performances in those pubs under normal times, obviously. It's all a very different cultural ecology has begun to emerge from that than what people would usually understand by an arts ecology. We're also supporting local artists or people who live in the area to move into the professional arts field and asking questions about what would it look like to be an artist in this area in the future. Now, of course, this has all been absolutely amplified by COVID. And I think we feel in quite a privileged position, being able to respond to COVID because of the community connections we've already made throughout the year. So we've been working at grassroots level with partners from food banks, from voluntary services to carry on some arts activity. We work with a fantastic organisation called 6 Million Plus, who work with refugees and asylum seekers. And we've been able to carry on projects because of those close community relationships and networks that exist in real time, as well as taking some of our activity online. So that's a little bit about our programme. And when we set out, I think it's about 5 years ago. Is it 5 years, Len? Nod if that's right. We are, as part of the project, we capture the stories of the project and we do a local evaluation of what's going on. And so about 5 years ago, we commissioned Len to create a blog for Creative Scene, interviewing the different people who were beginning to emerge as cultural leaders, creative practitioners, people getting involved in the programme. Little did we know at the time that 6 years later he was still going to be following us around, and what turned into a very successful blog, and the blog is still there. You can go and have a look at that. Fantastic portraits, photographs, which really show how the creative scene emerged over a period of 3 or 4 years. So then we were really happy to continue the relationship with Len and to move into asking him to create our first publication, which we were due to launch, of course, in typical fashion with grand bells and wine and nice food back just at the start of lockdown. So it's been a little while launching this, but I think it's a book which is even more pertinent now as we start to ask the question, how do we build back better, or what is a new cultural ecology going to look like in the future? So I'm going to ask Len to talk about
to read some of it out.
Yeah.
Is that right? You're going to throw something else in, Nancy, and ask me something totally different?
No, I think we were just going to ask you to read some sections of the book and maybe talk a little bit about how you found it as an artist, telling that story that emerged, because of course we didn't know what was going to happen when we first commissioned you, and we didn't, and I'm sure, well, we know you've got unique perspectives on how the creative scene and that cultural ecology has emerged.
Okay, well, we've seen the cover of the book so far. So it's a combination inside of sketches, and photographs. Sorry, I'm not showing. Should have done a share screen of this. This is you actually here, Stephen. Fancy that. I've just opened the page. Your lovely portrait, and and you're muted, so we can't hear your reaction. So a combination of photographs and sketches and some writing. So I'm going to kick off by reading from this piece. So you need to see this illustration, which is the Dewsbury Town Hall, and I'll read this for a couple of minutes. I'm sat on a bench. I'm sat on the bench opposite Pound World, sorry, drawing Dewsbury Town Hall. It's a warm day, but the old guy shuffling past with his stroller is still wearing his overcoat. Morning, Ray, he calls to the man pulling on his rollie next to me. It's Ron, corrects Ron, without returning the greeting. Two middle-aged women, each with large plastic Pound World bags, part company in front of my bench. I hope you'll speak to us after you've moved to Murfield, one shouts back to her friend as she heads past the e-cig shop towards Northgate. Sketch complete, I find the town hall entrance and head upstairs to the second floor. Today's lunchtime event is in the mayor's reception room, but on my way, I'm accosted by an older woman waving her walking stick towards the grand staircase. Is there something going on today, she asks. There's a film premiere at lunchtime, I begin. We're showing 12 short films, all about different people around Dewsbury. But she's already lost interest. This is Eileen Fenton. She swum the channel, she says, peering into a glass cabinet. I peer in beside her. The display shows local woman Eileen was the first woman to finish the international cross-channel race in 1950. She was a school teacher. She never married. I still know her. This all used to be at the Dewsbury Museum before it closed, says my impromptu local history guide, leading me to another cabinet where there's a wooden shuttle from blanket manufacturers, Wormholes and Walkers. I used that when I worked there. I wove all the army blankets for China and all over. You worked there? Oh, I did. At 14, she says. If one of those shuttles, they have steel ends, flew out of your loom because it wasn't flat, you could seriously injure someone. I had to pay a woman to show me how to weave when I first started. I paid her out of my first wage. She looks again at the shuttle. It really takes me back, that. I'm nearly 91, she says. Dewsbury's full of stories. Outside the reception room, name badges await Creative Scene's invited guests. Today, I'm Len Grant, storyteller and artist. I like that. As the sandwich and mozzarella bites are laid out, the Creative Scene team come together for a briefing. It's all about networking today, says creative producer Vicky. Let's make sure everyone's suitably impressed. Today's event is a double header. An invited audience are excited to be the first to see Alistair MacDonald's 12 short films commissioned by Creative Scene that showcase the unique character of this area. But before they've even reached the bottom of their popcorn bags, Creative Scene will share their impact report, what they've achieved in the last 4 years, and their latest development plan. And it goes on, but I've only got 3 minutes, and that I think was 3.5. Thank you. Somebody's clapping. It's very bizarre talking to an audience who I can't hear. I can see some clapping. Thank you. I can't hear anybody. Yes, I hope that went down well. Virtual clapping. Excellent. Even better.
Thank you, Len. Anybody who's read the book or been involved, or I know there are a couple of people here who feature in the book, either through one of the stories or through one of the portraits. Is there anybody would like to ask any questions from Len about the experience, or what parts of it were most interesting to him? There's Madiha there, and welcome Tracy. Just see you pop in. Hi.
Hi guys. Thank you, Nancy. Yes, I found the experience quite relaxed. So Len has a way of just relaxing you, and I sat across the table from him. I'm in the book. I'm on page 76. What an absolute honor. But I wanted to know, Len, how do you select the pictures? Because you took a lot of pictures that day. What made you select the pictures that finally get published?
Well, it's interesting because I was talking to someone recently about shooting digitally and how different it is when we used to shoot film. And I was thinking, like, shooting digitally is like firing a shotgun. There's loads of pellets go out, and one of them's bound to hit the target. And it's a bit like that, I think. But for these portraits, I wanted some animation. And people and images as if the people were looking. But I was just looking at your quote, and I love what you said. You say, I wasn't born here, I'm an immigrant. I moved to Dewsbury when I was 6. I remember very clearly this place, not being able to speak the language, not having any friends. And at the end of your piece, you say, through art, I'm getting more involved in my town. Last year, I co-hosted the Christmas light switch on, which for me was a big deal. 26 years after arriving, I feel like Dewsbury is now home. And that is through art. Isn't that so powerful?
Amazing. Amazing story.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions or comments on the book, or questions for Len about his practice, or any of the stories in the book?
I would just say, please do buy a copy, and I can say that because none of the money comes to you. It comes to me. It goes to Creative Scene. So I'm not plugging it for myself, but it's got a wonderful introduction by Jonathan, who we'll hear from later. And for me, it was a great honor to really get under the skin of the organization and the people who were involved, and the people who are benefiting from what's happening in that part of West Yorkshire.
And Len, as an artist, I have to say, has been brilliant to work with, and just really immerses himself. Again, as I say, if you imagine, we didn't really know what we were doing. We were looking for opportunities and looking for people as we started on the programme, looking for people to collaborate, hoping that there would be some energy around the things that we thought people might want to do and that people would get on board. I remember very early on, Len, we visited a number of sites in and around Batley and Cleckheaton, including the rugby pitch and the cricket ground, and meeting people in the social clubs there, trying to put on a big outdoor event. We didn't know whether we were going to be able to do that, and actually that event didn't come to pass. So as we went through the record of actually looking at possibilities and then seeing those possibilities emerge is one of the things that I think it captures really well. And Len's ability to just kind of embed into that. It's a bit like an embedded war reporter, really, but with much happier outcomes, not really knowing what's going to happen, but being able to record it and make sense of that narrative in the book.
Yeah, absolutely, and feel shell shocked sometimes. No, that's not true. But you were talking about how your program is experimental, and quite often when organisations commission somebody like myself to write about or to photograph something, you always see the end result, the positivity that's happened. And what we did with making a scene was to show the process. And I think the process, people learn more from the process than they do maybe from just the sort of glitzy, these are the highlights, So thank you for the opportunity.
That's what, and we will hope when we're able to, and we've got a venue and some exhibition space, to make an exhibition with photos from the book so that people can come out and we can have a bit of more chinking of glasses and conversations in real time with people involved. So the book's called Parking a Poem in a Biscuit Factory. The reason for that is it's one of the many strange and wonderful things our producers have done over the years in order to bring great art arts activity to everyone. Vicky Holiday is our producer. She's in the room, but she's nursing her baby, which she's very recently had. So hi, Vicky. Thank you for being the producer who parked a poem in a biscuit factory one time and brought a lot of fantastic events to our area. And we're looking forward to having you back before too long. So I'm going to pass over now to Jonathan Gross, who is, Dr. Jonathan Gross is a research fellow in the Department of Culture, Media and Creative Industries at King's College in London, with a particular focus on researching cultural participation and cultural policy. And Jonathan and I worked together a couple of years ago when Jonathan led on the National Creative People and Places evaluation report, which was looking at creating the environment and the different cultural ecosystems that exist within the different CPPs nationally. So we were really pleased to welcome Jonathan to our partnership group and to meet some of the people involved in the creative scene a couple of years ago. We're a case study in his report, and I hope Sarah can bob a link to that report into the chat there. So I'm going to ask Jonathan to give us some thoughts about cultural ecology, what he's observed within the Creative People and Places project, and how he sees things going forward. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Nancy. I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm just going to speak really briefly, just for 4 or 5 minutes, about this idea of cultural ecology and raise 3 questions. What do we mean by cultural ecology? Why does it matter, and how can it help us to build back better in the context of COVID and all the challenges that that's posing to us? Some of these ideas are in the book, which is a really beautiful piece of work. So I really recommend it to everyone. I think it would make a great Christmas present, apart from anything else. And so I'm just going to draw out some answers to those 3 questions really briefly. So what do we mean by cultural ecology? Well, people have been using this phrase for a while now, for 10, 15 years, and it's all about connections and relationships. So I'm going to give you one quick example, which was how I came to be interested in the idea of cultural ecology, which was when I was doing some research about everyday creativity, the way in which people are creative in their homes, in their everyday lives. And I interviewed a group of break dancers who were dancing in the center of a shopping center. And I wanted to find out about their everyday creativity. And what they told me was that what made it possible for them to do this dancing and develop their skills and practice was their school inviting a breakdancing teacher into the school. And that got them hooked. And then the teacher said, you can go to this Arts Council funded organization. They have dance classes which are funded by the local authority, and they're free for you to go to on a Saturday morning. And then they told me that they practiced on a Thursday night in a church hall, and which was supported by a local theatre company, etc., etc., etc. You get the idea. What made it possible for these people to do their everyday creativity was all these connections and relationships within a place. So that's what we mean by cultural ecology in the first place. It's just how the world works. It's how creativity and cultural opportunity happens through these kinds of relationships and interconnections between different kinds of organizations, different kinds of people, different kinds of resources. But it's not only a description of the way that the world is, it's also an approach to working together. So how could we work better as ecologies? How could we work more ecologically in supporting the arts and everyday creativity? Which takes us on to the second question that I'm raising. Why does it matter? What difference does it make to use this term, cultural ecology? Well, it helps us to understand how cultural opportunity actually works in practice. It also helps us to recognize the range of cultural life. All of those hidden, unseen forms of creativity are connected to the most visible forms of art and culture that happen. And they're all important, and we can recognize all of them if we take an ecological perspective. And it also helps us to shift our attention to people's agency. So in other words, where cultural value is located is across the ecology as a whole, and involves all kinds of people's preferences and choices and decisions. So in that sense, it does point towards a more democratic approach to culture. And finally then, how can the idea of cultural ecology help us to build back better from COVID? Well, if COVID shows us anything, it's how connected we all are. We've been clapping for carers, we've been involved in mutual aid and support, and we've all experienced the pain of separation in lots of ways. So COVID has shown us that we need each other more than ever, and I would suggest that the pandemic accelerates the need for ecological thinking and action. Milton Friedman, the economist, almost all of whose ideas I don't like, did ask the very useful question, what ideas are lying around when the crisis hits? And these are the ideas he's suggesting that will help us beyond the crisis. So I would suggest that thinking about cultural ecologies, thinking ecologically, is an idea whose time has come. It's an idea that helps us to respond to this kind of moment. And Nancy mentioned the report that I authored with my colleague Nick Wilson for the Creative People and Places programme. And in that report, there are 14 considerations for how to develop a flourishing cultural ecosystem. So do check them out if you're interested. Things about how we can build knowledge of what's going on within an ecology on an ongoing basis, how we can build democratic decision makings into our ecosystems. But of course, there could be lots of new ideas for how to develop flourishing cultural ecosystems, including the example of Len being an artist in a place. You know, he's paying attention in a new way to the ecosystem as a whole. What new forms of attention could be paid to our ecosystems in order to support them to flourish more democratically in the future? It's kind of an open question. So perhaps we'll talk further about that in the next few minutes. So I'll just leave it there, and thanks a lot for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan, for those thoughts. If you've got any questions, if things are appearing in your mind, if you want to jot them down or put them in the sidebar, I think what we'll do is move on to the next contributor and gather questions at the end of this session. Is that the plan, Anna? Are we more or less on time? Yeah, okay. So thanks, Jonathan, and a really warm welcome to Tracy Brabin MP. Tracy is the Labour and Cooperative Member of Parliament for Batley and Spen, and she's also the Shadow Minister for Cultural Industries. So as well as advocating for the creative industries on the national stage, Tracy is a passionate advocate for arts and culture in Batley and Spen. She grew up locally. She grew up on the Howden Clough estate in Birstall, where her mum still lives. And we're always delighted to see Tracy and her mum at so many of our events, a massive supporter of the local community and of the arts. Tracy was an actor herself and writer for more than 30 years before, as well as a Labour Party and trade union activist. And she took her seat in Batley and Spen in 2016 through the by-election, which was called through the tragic circumstances following the murder of Joe Cox MP. And Tracy was re-elected in June 2017 and voted in a third time in December 2019. So we are really grateful to have had Tracy's support, advocacy for all things creative and cultural, which have made a massive difference to our programme and to creating opportunities. So Tracy, I know you've got lots to say, so I'm going to pass it, and I know, Tracy, you know, there's a national agenda going on talking about levelling up, and we in Creative Scene, we don't talk about levelling up, we talk about levelling the playing field. I think there's something fundamentally different there about creating equal, not just equal opportunities, but equity of opportunity. I find the levelling up agenda a little bit patronising. And I know that you are involved in a lot of initiatives that seek to create more cultural opportunity, and you've got first-hand experience of supporting creative industries and trying during COVID times to create better conditions, particularly for the creative workforce. So over to you, Tracy, and welcome.
Thank you. Wow, what an introduction. Thanks so much, Nancy. And firstly, can I say thank you to Creative Scene for all you do for Batley and Spen, and also everybody that's on this call. I know our time is so stretched at the moment, isn't it? But I think this is probably one of the best attended Zooms I've been on for quite some time, so thank you all. And can I also say to Len, what an amazing book that is. And as somebody that worked at Fox's Biscuits in the summer, which is a rites of passage for everybody who has lived in Batley and Spen, I know the stories that are told on those packing machines, you know, that we could certainly write some great films around those stories. And the graphics are great, and I know that I think it'll do really well for our area. And you mentioned the 12 films. I had the privilege of seeing a short number of those, and it was just terrific to hear our stories told by us rather than have someone come in and be parachuted in to comment on our lives. So, you know, what Creative Scene are doing, bringing in that really high standard, that, you know, that A-list quality and talent to raise our gaze and our aspiration about what we think about for culture is something that I, in the 4 years I've been an MP, have been a real advocate for in every meeting I've attended, that I think creative people and places should be rolled out across the whole country, and every community should have a creative scene. And I know actually that they have been widened out and there are more communities having them, but we should all have our own creative scene, and more power to your elbow. So I'm going to speak for about 7 or 8 minutes. There's just a few reflections and then some thoughts about what I think we could be doing going forward. Firstly, I just want to share with you a memory that when I first became the MP, I went onto the IOU double-decker bus with its open top bus. And it was on a tour around Batley. We were all wearing headsets, and it was an installation. And where we arrived, there was an artist speaking on her mic about her story, and it was all very poetic. Anyway, my mum's 89, and she was sat on this double-decker bus in the freezing cold, and because she had her headphones on, she just said really loudly, "Who'd have thought anybody in Batley wanted to see this?" And I do think that actually there is something to be said for giving people something surprising to actually open their minds and their hearts to what else is out there. That actually, just because we're working people, that doesn't mean to say we can't enjoy lyricism or installations or poetry. I think there's often, and certainly we saw it with Jake Berry, one of the Tory Northern MPs who was in a Westminster Hall debate about culture about 10 days ago, saying, well, in the North, our culture is rugby and football. And it's very frustrating that there is an assumption that working people don't enjoy the arts or being stretched or thinking out of their own lifestyle. So it's something I'm committed to, I'm very excited about, and I've seen extraordinary work that comes out of Creative Scene, the amazing dance project outside Oakwell Hall. One of the best things I've ever seen in my life was Batley does opera at the local, it's a church and a bit of a club, and the working people who are not singers told their stories to a writer, a really talented writer, and that was turned into an opera, and I absolutely had one of the best nights out at the theatre. And you know, I really think it needs a sequel, if not to be put on film. It's really great. And the light installations in Heckmondwike that are almost world-beating, curated by a chap who ran a local cafe, who has been upskilled by Creative Scene to become a real expert on light installations. And the people of Heckmondwike actually not really aware of how sort of world-beating some of those projects are. So it's really great what they're doing. As Nancy said, I've been a writer and an actor for 30 years, and I hope to bring my interest in that to Batley and Spen. And when I was approached by a West End director who directed Billy Elliot to do a production in memory of Jo, of Les Mis, which was her favourite musical, but with a West End team to sort of raise the aspirations, immediately said yes. We were going to do it in a disused warehouse. We couldn't find anything. It was just after a sequence of terrorist attacks and people were very nervous about giving us a venue. And then Oxfam stepped up and we had the most extraordinary production that cost in kind and in donations about 450 grand of Les Mis, with a West End teachers basically teaching young people their skills for their department. These young people had residential rehearsals at Leeds University. So there were communities who had never spoken to each other before, now living under the same roof, sharing passion for Les Mis. Anyway, needless to say, sold out, standing ovations. But what was really important was the transformational nature of it. That getting letters from parents saying, my child was really struggling with mental health problems, self-harming, I have my child back. One young man with a stammer who was really socially isolated, telling me, I've now got a group of friends, and now he's gone on to university, and is going to be an engineer. It's an extraordinary transformation for him. This is the power of the things we can do in our community. And then being able to say to the National Youth Theatre, come with free auditions and bursaries for your summer scheme for our kids, because they wouldn't go to Manchester, they won't go to Hull for auditions. They came and we got 9 young people on the National Youth Theatre scheme. This stuff really does work and transforms people's lives. And thank you as well to Creative Scene. I've had an idea about a mural festival locally for the last couple of years, and because of Creative Scene's brilliant input, and I know that Zoe and Yusuf in my team are on this call, and we've managed to persuade the council and businesses and schools to get involved, and we're going to have a Spring into Batley mural festival with singing streets, so we're having choirs as well, to say that hopefully COVID will be at the tail end of that and we will be able to celebrate opening up. So we know the great work that's been done in our corner of the UK, but we also have seen, haven't we, the decimation of the sector because of COVID. And I've had thousands of people in the creative industries contact me about the fact they've been left with nothing since March. I know that the government they've done a decent job. The 1.57 billion, I'm sure, was hard to sort of eke out of the Treasury. However, it's where that money goes that's really important, and who gets it. Is it the buildings or is it the creators? And certainly I've been making the case relentlessly that it is the creators who need support, because we've already seen so many leave the sector already. Musicians, hand over fist, leaving and getting other jobs because they just can't make it work. So I've been making that case that we need to support those creators through this process. Also, it's frustrating to see the Secretary of State for DCMS as a job where people use it as a stepping stone. I think it's one of the best jobs in government, that you could transform every department if you had a cultural sort of filter, you know, whether that's health or transport. It's a shame that since I became an MP, we've had 3 now, I think, in that role. So I'm hoping Oliver Dowden stays. So we have a crisis on our hands. We are hopefully coming to the end of it, looking towards the spring. But we are broken and beaten and grieving. Our communities, particularly in the north, I think have been hyper exposed to COVID. We've had lots of job losses, businesses closing, and people losing loved ones and going through very traumatic experiences, not being there at the birth of their child, not being there when their mother has passed away. You know, we have a community who are raw, and I think that creativity and art can be healing. And I spent 5 years working with torture survivors in a writers group as part of Freedom from Torture, and I know how healing writing and creativity generally can be when you have experienced horrible crisis. I mean, obviously we know there's a digital divide for our community, and I'm working with the council and government to make sure that at least young people have access to digital creativity, or a digital a phone or an iPad anything so that they can be connected. And also working with my colleagues in health, because I have a plan for creative recovery. And I think this is could be a solution to our massive job losses that we're going to see across our region, but also the need for healing and to repair our communities. And I think we can do that through social prescribing. And for those of you that don't know, that's something that the government have been persuaded to include into their long-term plan for the NHS. But social prescribing, you go to the doctor, you don't necessarily get a prescription for an antidepressant, you'll get a prescription for creative minds, or for a dance class, or for a choir. And at the moment, we have over 1,200 link officers, link people who are working in primary care, who are going to be the bridge between the doctor, the patient, and the provider of the creativity and the project. Now, I'm concerned that I don't think that's enough. I also am worried that where the prescriptions are going, they are voluntary, often, rather than actually businesses set up to provide this support. So I think all the young people who were maybe starting out in their careers, who now as actors or musicians or writers or filmmakers don't have that chance at the moment, that they could then be those link workers or those supporters to provide this creative recovery. And I think as we go forward, that everything that comes to Parliament, we should think and have that filter. Is this about healing our communities? Are we using our creative problem solving capabilities in the best way? How can we make it this fun or full of joy in order for people to find some hope in their lives? And I know that this is something that Nancy and Vicky are working on in our communities, bringing joy for its own sake into Batley and Spen particularly. And if I could just finally say, I've probably gone over my time, so apologies. You know, I'm very passionate about this area. But that if I could just say, I met a brilliant woman who had been having mental health problems all her life. She's been under care of the NHS and sectioned a couple of times. Her daughters were her carers. And then she came across Creative Minds. And I'll just read this very quickly to you. She's now an international artist and a motivational speaker. She said, "To say art saved my life is not a phrase I use lightly. It saved it, yes, but it transformed it beyond any recognition to anything I've ever had before. Art has given me a life, an identity, a voice, and a future. From feeling useless and a drain on the NHS, I am now adding value and giving back." We know the power of creativity, and we know that the creative recovery is possible. We just need to persuade those decision makers, lawmakers, and I will be in the vanguard at the front of making that argument. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen. And just something that Nancy didn't mention is I'm also standing for selection for the West Yorkshire Mayor. So you won't be surprised to know that a creative New Deal is part of my offer as part of my manifesto as well. So thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for sharing all of those stories with us, and good luck in your campaign. I think, you know, how we build back after COVID is going to be really important in areas like Batley and Spen. The sense of isolation is palpable when you go around the streets. And we know we had a small window, I think, back in around October half term, where we were able to do some work outdoors on the streets of Batley and Dewsbury. And people were literally swerving us, keeping away from us. That sense that we'd built up over many years of putting something on in a park or a town centre and people flocking towards it, getting involved, beginning to engage with something out of curiosity, has shifted. You know, people are very hesitant to come forward and get involved. So as well as the very practical challenges of, you know, all the things we're all grappling with as a sector now of how do we get audiences in safely, how do we get them out safely, how do we put events outside and manage numbers so that we don't go over restrictions. that there is the emotional side of how we get people to engage with the arts again. So a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities. We're really excited to be working in Batley and Spen on the spring mural project, and we will be making a bid to the Thriving Communities Fund, which will support social prescribing across with a number of different partners. So if there is anybody from Batley and Spen or Dewsbury who wants to get involved in that, do drop us a line. We'll be happy to have more partners in that bid. So we are going a little bit over time, but we've got a bit of flex at the end. Before we pass on to Madiha, I'm just going to ask Anna, I know you've been keeping an eye on the chat there. Are there any questions you want to put in at the moment and open up the conversation?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple of things just coming through. Everyone's sort of seeing, thanks for that recommendation there, Jonathan, for social prescribing. The body keeps the score. And Len making a really important point there that the arts sector's known the healing power of creativity for years, but it needs the budget to do this, which is absolutely important. There's a couple of questions for Jonathan as well, so I'm just trying to chivvy them out at the moment. Chloe was asking Tracy, how do we find out who the link officers to the GPs are? Would you know the answer to that, maybe?
I think Kirklees will have something on their website, which is potentially Kirklees Health Watch. I will find out. I think Yusuf's on this call, and maybe he can help me dig it out and put it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Tracy. Emily Murray, probably maybe another question for you, Tracy, here. Do you think that government support of cultural institutions and the wider cultural ecology through funding and policy is essential to creating and increasing the public value of arts and culture?
Is that in the chat? Sorry, I was just texting Yusuf to get me that link. Apologies.
Multitasking, I like it. No, don't worry, I'll read it again. So it's from Emily Murray. So she wanted to know, do you think that government support of cultural institutions and the wider cultural ecology through funding and policy is essential to creating and increasing the public value of arts and culture?
Well, I would say the problem is that there is an equation between how much it costs and how much people value it as art and culture. We know that with high-end opera, and how many people access that, but how much it takes out of our budgets, but how much we say that that's part of our unique selling point around the world, that high-end opera. I absolutely, I'm of the mind that that equation doesn't ring true, that the more you spend, then the more it's worth. Because certainly if you know the work of fun palaces, that is community driven and in libraries and community centres, that possibly costs very little, but actually the impact on our communities is absolutely essential. And if you're talking about projects that actually take people on a journey to healing, that saves the NHS hundreds of thousands of pounds further down the line, but that's not quantifiable. So I would dispute that assertion that if it's very expensive, then it is high art or to be protected. And it is something that I've said on a number of occasions to Oliver Dowden, that, you know, the crown jewels that he talks about, of course, you know, they are tourist magnets and they're important with our soft power around the world. But also when you think about a young kid in Batley who's written a short film or a little play or something that's put on in a community centre that then is developed and then turns into something on the stage and turns into a film and then becomes something very expensive and lauded and applauded. But if you haven't done the backfill work, that doing the stuff right at the beginning, then actually you're not going to end up with that content. So there's no point just pouring money into buildings. And to those who are already doing it, we have to make sure that we have that incubator funds. And certainly, if I could just say, Black Lives Matter has really impacted on my thinking about this, because I represent a brilliantly wonderful, diverse community, but none of my community apply for schemes like Beyond Bronte's at Screen Yorkshire or Screen Skills training schemes for Channel 4. They just don't feel it's for them. We have a real job of work to do to say right at the beginning is where the value is. That's where we should be putting the money, because that's the incubator to create our content, to create our amazing playwrights and artists and musicians and creators. So, I don't know what the person who asked the question thinks, but for me, it's a false equivalence.
Okay, thank you, Tracy. That's great. A couple of questions for you, Jonathan, that seems to come through. So Joy said, it seems the idea of cultural ecology is closely connected to the concept of cultural democracy. Is there a difference between them?
Yeah, so cultural democracy, as you probably know, was an idea that was around in the 70s and 80s and really associated with community arts practice. And then it's sort of come back in the last 3 or 4 years. And there's lots of conversation about what is cultural democracy. And my view on it is that it is very, very closely connected to cultural ecology, because for me, cultural democracy is about how is the whole system of culture, art and creativity, how is it democratic? And for me, that has to be through ecological ways of doing things. Other people might have a vision of cultural democracy which doesn't give so much emphasis to the ecological way of working. But for me, that's my argument, that to achieve cultural democracy, you need to work through these kinds of ecological connections and relationships. So that would be my answer to the question.
Perfect. Thank you, Jonathan. Another one for you, Jonathan, from Bev Day. So post-COVID, as individual organisations continue to compete for available funds, what are the tricks for bringing them together to create a cultural ecology?
Yeah, so I've noted sort of 3 thoughts on that very interesting question around, like, how do we do funding well in order to support cultural ecologies? And I've got three thoughts. One is around what we ask of individual organisations in receipt of funding. So what does the funding fund? And maybe sort of expanding horizons beyond traditional practices of audience development and inclusion within the organisation, which is incredibly important. But we can be thinking more broadly about contributions to the ecology, which might require different kinds of resourcing, which then relates to my second point, which would be around what is it that we fund? You know, things like Creative Scene, the whole Creative People and Places project. It's a new way of funding, which is more ecological in its ambitions, but it's still only a small proportion of public funding. So let's expand those new ways of funding ecologically. And then the third point would be to sort of expand our ambitions for what cultural funding and cultural policy is for. So it's fantastic to hear Tracy talk about her Creative New Deal. I absolutely think we should be putting culture and creativity in the heart of these sort of big picture plans for the future. I've recently written a piece about the role of cultural policy in the Green New Deal. It's behind a paywall. If you'd like to read it, please just pop me a line and I'll share it with you. But I think we should be saying, you know, this isn't a nice to have on the side. It has to be central to policy for communities, for economies, and we should be thinking in those terms.
Brilliant, thank you, John. I think that also connects with a couple of points that Sam Broadhead's been making. So Sam sort of mentioned in one of the earlier questions about how cultural ecologies might be linked to sustainable development goals. And I think also Sam was highlighting about how we support people back into the creative industries and what the role for arts education might be on that as well. So 2 big questions that we might not be able to answer in this session, but definitely ones to lodge there as well. So just handing back to you then, Nancy.
Great. Thank you for those questions. I think one of the things that we were keen to support when we started Creative Scene was opportunities for people from the area to come forward as cultural leaders. And so I'm really pleased to introduce Madiha Ansari. Madiha and I first met 6 years or so ago when Madiha put her hand up and volunteered to be a performer along with her mother in a fantastic production that we did with Theatre Complicité called Like Mother, Like Daughter, a brilliantly simple concept of women, a mother and a daughter, coming together with other women around a table and asking each other questions. Was an absolutely fantastic project and so moving, and enabling that space for mothers and daughters from our area to tell their stories was a key part of that. Madiha has got a particular interest in developing South Asian engagement with the arts, and from her experience with Creative Scene, and she also works in Bradford with the producing hub there, she's going to talk to us a bit more about her her journey with Creative Scene and how she sort of started to move into developing more opportunities for people. So over to you, Madiha.
Thank you, Nancy, and the rest of the team of Creative Scenes for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be here amongst such esteemed speakers. So really, you are right. Creative Scenes has done something for me that the previous speakers, so Tracy mentioned raise aspirations. If I think about empowerment, if I think about sowing that initial seed, Creative Scenes has played such an important part in the early part of my professional arts career. But if I think about my relationship with the arts, so I remember as a child, I was a regular on the talent show front in Pakistan. So I was born in Karachi, and I remember my mum would always, we'd rehearse, we'd have these costumes, and I would go and participate in talent shows, which are very typical around Independence Day, around these sort of big government. For that, yeah. But as I grew up, sorry, did I just cut off for a second? I'm sorry. It's just
You're okay.
Yeah. But as I grew up, it seemed like the arts was just for fun. It's just a hobby. And I was really encouraged to pursue a career in the sciences. So I went on to study medicine, dropped out. Then I had a very long and very reluctant career in the education sector in and around Dewsbury and Batley. It was very fulfilling, but I just didn't feel like it was for me. In 2018, I finally had the courage to sort of say goodbye to the education sector and come into the arts full time. It was very scary. A lot of artists here will know that there is no money, especially at the moment. COVID has really, because of COVID, we're struggling. But if I speak about my money and the arts, back in 2016, we applied for a small grant with Creative Scenes for, I think it was about £500, and we organized a little event. I wrote a couple of sketches, and we did some poetry sharing and an interview with a writer that was visiting from Pakistan. And we just, in £500, tried to get as much as we could in kind at the local primary school, my son's infant school, actually, here in Dewsbury. And that would become the first time I received a check for being on stage. And it was for £50. And I cannot tell you how much I valued that £50, because I couldn't believe that I could go on stage, write something, be creative, and I could receive money for it. Because in my household, I grew up with a lot of literature, music, and film, but it was just a hobby. I would go on to join the Dewsbury Arts Group, which is an amateur theatre group here in Dewsbury. I was and still am the first South Asian member of the Dewsbury Arts Group in the 50 years that they've been around. For me, that is really odd, because Dewsbury Arts Group is it's a stone throw away from one of the biggest, one of the most densely populated South Asian areas in the region, so Savile Town, for example, of the areas in Batley. But there just wasn't engagement towards the arts. And I started in my journey with sort of the arts myself. I started to ask those questions, why is there a lack of engagement? What is it? Is it training? Is it just cultural barriers? I worked with Vicky on a multicultural mushaira that we put on at the PKWA, I think back in 2018. And I was really, when I talk about empowerment, Vicky and
Just dropped out there again, Madiha, on your mic. You're back.
Sorry?
You dropped out for a moment, but you're back again now.
Yeah, sorry. It seems as though everybody wants to get hold of me right now, Nancy. So Vicky really took me under her wing, and that would become the basis of my training as a producer. I don't think we knew it at the time. I wonder if Vicky was planning on doing it like that. But what I learned working on that multicultural mushaira with the team, I would go on to apply to a lot of the other, a lot of the other events and projects that I've gone on to produce. I've often struggled with what it is that I do in the arts. But somebody very close to me said that you're a cultural agitator, a provocateur, and a creative change maker. So I'll take that. And I've, of course, moved a lot of my practice to Bradford. Over there, I became, I got exposure to the social enterprise sector. And I have gone on to set up my own social enterprise called the Cultural Ecology Project. I think the name, I don't think it would be fair for me to say that the name wasn't inspired by all those breakfast meetings that we had with creative scenes or all the conversations that I had the pleasure of being part of. So the Cultural Ecology Project at the moment is, as a direct response, we are launching the first training course for arts sector practitioners aimed at female artists from ethnic minority backgrounds or diverse backgrounds. And I've got the pleasure of being able to offer sort of mentorship pathways and really tailored workshops around producing, dramaturgy, arts fundraising, which is something I'm still struggling with, arts admin, audience development, advertising and marketing. These are all things that people do not realize can be viable careers in the arts. And we have just formed the South Asian Theatre Collective in Bradford as well. But a lot of our members are from the region, so are from Dewsbury and Batley. It has been, it's been the most fulfilling journey that I've ever had in my life. And I like Len said, and I've said it in the quote from the book, art was a way for me to gain that belonging that I didn't have as an immigrant. And I had very good access to very good education and higher education and all of that, but it was actually art that made me a part of this place. So even though I do work a lot in Bradford at the moment, I'm still reluctant to leave Dewsbury, and I'm very, very attached to this town. So really, I think my objectives, and I feel like my biggest act of activism at the moment is because as an emerging artist, I found such a lack of cultural role models, and everything that I do is around creating a more diverse cultural ecology, about changing the face of cultural leadership in the area. So I want to see more people of color, more women in leadership roles. We are quite lucky because I am in this room with Nancy and Tracy, who are amazing examples of female cultural leaders. So I think our region's doing pretty well on that front. But as a whole, that there is a big lack. So really, it is all about changing the face of cultural leadership. And thank you for that initial support and that initial leg up and that initial empowering that, and that sort of generosity of whether it was sharing resources or the informal training that I got whilst working with you guys. Thank you for that, because it's because of that time that I am able to now give back to the cultural community. I'm done. I just want to leave everybody with one provocation, because we are talking a lot about the cultural ecology in the region with the new mayoral the new elections, which Tracy, good luck to Tracy for that. I'm right behind you, Tracy, on that, FYI. And with the imminent Bradford 2025, so Bradford is applying to be, is bidding to be the UK City of Culture in 2025. We're talking a lot about diversity, as we've always done. And the provocation that I want to leave you with is, do the arts really value diversity? Question mark, big question mark. And that's it for me. Thank you so much, Nancy. It's such a pleasure to be here. I could talk on.
And we'd love to hear you, Madiha. I mean, I think one of the things we've noticed doing these online conversations is actually it does bring a much more diverse group of people into the room than might be expected, and than is usually possible when we're in a physical location. And there's lots of comments and questions coming up in the chat now. So I'm going to introduce two other speakers. We've got about 20 minutes, I think, now for just to broaden out with a couple of other speakers and for a bit more of a panel discussion, really. So to join Tracy and Madiha and Jonathan and Len, if you'd like to take part as well. Just want to introduce Stephen Turner. Stephen is an artist whose work he spends a lot of time in abandoned places and looking at the complex relationship between human-made and natural environments. And Stephen's recently moved back to Dewsbury. He's got a fantastic studio there, and we're hoping to work with him in the future. I'll let you say a bit more about some of your work, Stephen. And the other person I'd like to introduce is Dr. Chloe Whitehead. Hi, Chloe. Chloe is a practitioner and artistic director of Proper Job Theatre Company, based in Huddersfield but working around the country. And Proper Job specialises in using theatre to work with adults, building confidence and emotional resilience, often with people who have been out of work for a period. She's an expert in Meyerhold's theatrical biomechanics technique, and she's part of Proper Job's touring team. So Chloe's going to share a little bit about her experiences with Proper Job and how they've reviewed their work and the landscape during COVID. So shall I pass to you first, Chloe? Would you able to talk a little bit about your experience of how you've worked through the pandemic and the different constraints on your work, and what you're finding the landscape looks like now and what it might look like in the future?
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, well, I won't talk for too long, but yes, I think probably like most people, we all jumped to be online and just move everything online. And then there was that realization that actually that's just not enough, is it? Just to put everything online, because there's so many barriers to being online, particularly with the people we're working with, the vulnerable adult community. And there was, there are so many, not only was arts already difficult to access, but then you're putting an extra barrier in place. And also, the other thing I've noticed now that we're in this sort of second lockdown, is that actually what we really need in the art and the creativity is that connection. So going back to what Jonathan said at the start, I really think you've hit the nail on the head with that connectivity is what we're all craving. And I've realized now just little things like going to the market. I'm in Tobberden and we've got a great market in Tobberden, and that's become our cultural activity. On a Saturday, it's absolutely buzzing in that market. Nobody's, not particularly shopping, but just like seeing people and having real conversations. And I think that's what's so important about the arts and creativity, is how we connect with people. And taking what Tracy said about that sort of the aspiration that it lends to people. It's so important, isn't it, that we see ourselves in the arts. And I think that's where the question about diversity there, Madiha, that are we really diverse? Because do people from diverse communities see themselves represented in the arts? Going back to that boy who took on the dance classes, the break dancing classes. If you said to him, do you want to do a dance class? He's going to say no, because I don't see young, cool male guys dancing. But as soon as I see the young, cool male guy dancing, then now I can understand that I could be a dancer. I can take that little step. I can now have that aspiration that art has given me. So I think we're just at a point now where we're really craving that connectivity, and how we get that back in a post-COVID society. I think there's going to be a real need for us to connect up. I think people are going to be much more up for it, which will be a great thing. But I think we just need to make sure we make the most of that, and it doesn't go back to perhaps just arts for a certain sector of the community. And we really, really brace that question that Madiha put about the diversity issue, and are we genuinely addressing that, or are we sort of tokenistically addressing that?
Thanks, Chloe. And I'm thinking about two things. Somebody mentioning about the funding. This needs funding. And Madiha, I hope that generosity is part of our way of working at Creative Scene. However, we've been able to be generous because we've had lots of money. You know, the first 3 years of our program, we were able to do a high level of engagement. We were able to get lots of people on board, and we're at a point where that's diminishing now. So we are really looking forward to and hoping to be involved in future Arts Council initiatives and to see what comes out of the 10-year strategy, and hoping that commitment to creative people and places and keeping this generosity open so that we can level the playing field is still there. Stephen, where's Stephen gone? Hi, Stephen. Sorry. We're last but not at all least. I'm wondering what are your thoughts on, as an artist who's been working in your studio in Dewsbury throughout COVID, normally used to a lot of international travel. I know you've worked in Venice recently and London.
But also working, there are two sides to what I do really. I'm an individual artist. I often work in complete isolation for months at a time and share the evidence of that experience, which in COVID has been like an interesting thing for me. I spent 8 weeks a few years ago living on an abandoned sea fort 6 miles offshore, and kind of trying to think about what isolation might mean and what the difference was between isolation and solitude, because solitude can be a wonderful thing which is uplifting. Isolation can be very destructive. But so that's one thing. I mean, what I have missed is the other side of my practice, which is being with people and listening. And for the last 4 years, I've been touring my large sculptural egg around Britain to different places where it floats on water and I can live in it, or people can visit it. And mostly it seems to have involved drinking loads of tea while chatting to people, come to visit the Eggman and look at the egg, and I can find out more about their lives and their place whenever the egg is visited. That was curtailed in March. I couldn't finish the project I'm doing in Thamesmead, which is just left hanging with funding implications, because I can't claim the last tranche of my money until I complete the project, which I'm determined to do when COVID eventually stops. I've lost 6 months of work in Yorkshire. I should have taken the egg to Harewood, where it should be floating on the lake at Harewood House from July until December, which ended. So in that sense, I've lost income, but I haven't lost work in a sense, because I don't have a job. I don't have a vocation, and I don't have a profession. I've just got an almighty obsession, and it's a passion. And I think that's what drives me, and it wouldn't matter if the funding stopped, because I'd find some way to keep making something, keep asking questions. And it's, in the end, not about art, it's about curiosity, being curious about who I am and where I am, and finding out what that means to other people as well. And I spent a lot of time over the last 6 months walking around Crowness Park. And even socially distanced, you can actually engage with quite a lot of people. And I've had loads of conversations in walled gardens and under trees around the duck pond. And so in a sense, and found lots of passionate people volunteering. I hadn't realized until recently the park's run by volunteers. So people give their time to things that they value everywhere. And that's something I think is very important. But I don't know, there was one thing I wanted to say, a slight caveat to the value of art and well-being, because it's not a universal panacea. I mean, I've been working on a book, I'm writing a book called Everything from the Egg, not unnaturally given the last few years. I've spent 2 weeks and written 3,000 words, and it's been a struggle, and it's made me really unhappy. I just tore the lot up and I've had to start again. And I've been really unpleasant to be around, and I mean that. Normally that unpleasantness is shared with all my friends and we can talk about it. My partner bears the brunt of that right now. And so, you know, there is an element that art isn't something which is wonderful, and it's dangerous, you know. Sometimes you're riding a nightmare, and in a serious sense, it can damage your health as well as improve it. And I think, I'm not going to kind of go on about that, but I think that's, you know, I might need a prescription from a doctor because I'm an artist, not because I'm
Thank you, Stephen. A brilliant provocation there. We're getting close to time, but let's allow a bit of time here at the end. I'm sure there's lots of questions. If anybody wants to put their hand up or use a little sticker thing, I'm not sure. Anna, is there anything that strikes you from the chat?
No, I think people are kind of generally just sharing information, which is great. Sarah, thanks for sharing some of the things that we've got going on at Creative Scene.
I think Zhao's got a question there. Hi, Zhao.
Hi, thanks for having me. I have a question for Tracy. There's a significant drop in R's GCSE and A-level entries in the last years. What can be done to stop it?
I couldn't agree more, and it's absolutely heartbreaking that this is happening, because we know the enrichment in school of music, dance, drama. It actually enables young people to have confidence and, you know, emotional intelligence and empathy and all the things that parents pay a huge amount for in very expensive private schools. So that erosion has been something that has been concerning me for many years. And in fact, I've had many meetings with ministers about this who say, well, they can access it from an after-school club. And actually, that's immediately the problem, because it's about logistics, it's about someone collecting you, it's about money, it's about commitment from parents, it's not embedded in the curriculum. Now, we have an amazing school, primary school here called Gomersall Primary, and their school, the setup is that the art department is in the center of the school, it's the hub, and every lesson goes through the art class. Those young people came to Parliament and did a presentation to MPs, and honestly, every third person was weeping at their passion for their school, and also from what they'd gained from their art and open thinking and, you know, creative problem solving and all of that. But then those young people were also saying, I'm scared about going to secondary school because I know I'm not going to get it in secondary school. It is really wrong. And certainly, I know we should focus on, you know, coding and tech, but that's also creative, and that creative problem solving, you know, synapses, it's really important. We know, don't we, that if you're good at music, you're often very good at maths. The two do go together. I continue to make the case. I think it's also important that those people who are doing really well in their careers say, thanks to the music or drama I had at school, this is why I'm where I am today. I'm certainly also very concerned about music out of the curriculum, and now peripatetic teachers coming in to do a class. The government's offer for music is, I think it's 6 lessons, often a ukulele or a guitar. Well, what if you're actually a harpist? Or what if you're a pianist? You know, I'm not sure that it's always engaging just 6 lessons, because you have to build up capacity in someone and their commitment to music. It's not just about necessarily picking out the talented ones and then letting the rest fall by the wayside. And art, don't we know, it does not matter at all whether you are an artist or you can do art. Self-expression and flow is so important for mental health. And I don't have the numbers, but I would definitely make an informed guess that the rise in mental health issues for young people and the diminishing of our arts offer in schools, there's a correlation between those two things. And I always used to say that drama in schools is free therapy for kids, that you can bring stuff to your drama group that potentially you have nowhere else to work through. So I'm with you, and I feel your frustration, but it's something that myself and other colleagues as well in Parliament are working hard on.
Thanks, Tracy. I think Laura Brooks, did you have a question, Laura?
Hi, yeah. I feel like a bit of an imposter. So I am from Bradford, well, from Manchester, but live in Bradford. I run the Bradford Fringe project, and I'm part of the Creativity Council, with the Producing Hub, and also part of the newly formed Bradford Cultural Collective. So we're recognising, you know, that the need for us to work together is greater than the need for us to work alone. You know, we understand the need for shared resources, and I feel like I can see this like so well in this room as well. You know, with Creative Scene and the work that you do is really collaborative. You know, and how do we like instill that in our practice from the beginning, you know, to make sure that collaboration and, you know, the participatory practices are there from the outset, you know, without losing some of the artistic direction that we have as artists as well. But we've recognized that a lot of this comes down to the fact that there isn't the infrastructure there to be able to support the young people, and not just young people, people at the early level or entry level into the cultural sector. There's not a lot of infrastructure there to support people. So we're looking at how we can set up a group collective of like mentors to build a talent development program within the cultural collective, and how that can work in more, like, not just work in Bradford, but how that can work in more rural settings as well. So, you know, looking at how we bring that and maybe have roving meetings and come to Dewsbury and to Batley, and to understand the needs from in Bradford, the needs of the you know, the towns and the cities that are surrounding us, and how we can work in maybe a greater cultural ecology where it isn't, you know, where we have got a more of a West Yorkshire feel than just than just our individual cities, you know, as we're going for, and Tracy is going for the Mayor of West Yorkshire position. And, you know, I feel like creativity should be at the forefront of that. It should be about our recovery, and, you know, how do we do that as a whole district, you know, in a, you know, without those barriers that some of us face.
Totally agree, Laura, and we've always engaged with people in Bradford. We know that the cultural ecology doesn't stop at the Kirklees border or the M62. So do get in touch with us. Let's have another conversation. It'd be love to see how we can collaborate or share learning. And of course, buy the book or get the book and have a look at some of the stories in there that tells you how we did it. I know Tracy wanted to come in there as well.
Just to pick up on Laura's point, I think part of the problem is transport for young people's engagement, because we know our community of towns and villages doesn't have the proper bus routes. And certainly as a kid, I only was able to access the drama club I went to in Bradford because my dad was a rep. He was a sales rep and he had a car, and he used to take me to the club. Now that's not the case for lots of young people, and certainly during Les Mis and the rehearsals, we had to physically collect a substantial number of children to take them because their parents either weren't engaged, or they didn't have a car, or they didn't value the experience, or they felt that they should be doing something else like schoolwork instead. So I think it's really important that whatever we do, we factor in an opportunity to make sure that those kids are, you know, get access to transport, and whether that's, you know, on a more global level, whether it's free transport for the under 18s or under 19s, or whether it's when you set up a project, you start to think about, actually, how do we get our kids here and how do we get them home? I think that's also quite a fundamental point that stops engagement.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks.
I was just going to say, like, involving some schools in our planning, maybe, you know, when we're creating projects, you know, if we go to schools and ask them, can we put this on your syllabus? Is this able to do for 2022 to include this in your work? So we've got some of that more active engagement as well from schools directly. Sorry to jump in there. It was just the thought, like, if we can get it early enough so that they're actually learning about in school the stuff we're trying to engage them with, we might get a better reception as well.
Yeah, there should be, Laura, a cultural education partnership in Bradford. Each local authority has got one of those. So I'd suggest engaging with them to try and find that route into schools.
Yeah, we do, but it's still difficult, and schools can be rigid about that syllabus. So it's finding that sympathetic teacher sometimes, the teacher who's invested in the arts, you know, who wants to give the kids another experience to facilitate some of that. But maybe if we've got any of those contacts, if we can share some of those sympathetic teachers, we can have a bigger impact.
Absolutely. And I'd love to find a way of putting the work that Gomersall Primary does centre stage, so that people can see what arts and culture really integrated into the curriculum and right at the heart of the school, right at the heart of young people's education from very early years, and the impact that has. Madiha.
Yes, I was just going to contribute to that about the transport issue. We organized a Dastan Goi event in late 2018, which is an Urdu storytelling event with a really famous storyteller from Pakistan. And we did it on a zero budget. And I don't know if you remember, but Creative Scenes, you contributed financially towards a bus that went from Dewsbury to Bradford. And, a whole bus of audience members who were never going to be able to engage with that sort of an event. It happened at the Theatre in the Mill at the Bradford University. That something like that is really good. But going back to what you said, Nancy, back then you did have a lot more funding, and that funding is decreasing. About grant funding, the funding that we've got for the training course that we are going to be delivering through the Cultural Ecology Project is through the European Social Fund. They are extremely strict, if you know them. They're very strict, and they have very stern guidelines. I wish I could get funding from a UK body to deliver a course that met the needs of my community. I know my community. The ESF doesn't know my community. But it's just, I feel like the powers lie with the people who have the money, unfortunately. And I know in Bradford, we are very frustrated about that. I know conversations with Laura and the Creative Collective. We're very frustrated about who is controlling the money. So another provocation, and I would like to sort of, I'd like to campaign for Tracy, for yourself. You guys are in a position of that, in a position of power to be able to influence where the power is, especially Tracy, I think. And I don't know if Tracy would like to say something about that.
Tracy?
Yeah,
we also need to be quite brief because I think we
very briefly, just fundamentally, it's a bit crap in opposition because, there's so much I want to do. There's so much I see that can be done, but it is about persuading people who have other agendas. So that's very brief, but working with councils, I think the local councillors are often undervalued as people who can initiate change in their communities, and that's something I really find as a priority, is working with our local councillors.
Okay, thanks to all the panel, artists, contributors. It's been an absolutely fantastic discussion, and as I say, we organised these two symposium or webinars with not much idea about who might get involved, but it has been fantastic to have this diversity, and I think we will continue to create this space for people to come together and maybe go into more detail on some of these questions that people are talking about. What are the barriers to engagement for people, particularly from the South Asian community? How do we create more opportunities for young people, particularly when the arts is being just beaten out of the curriculum, and the kids who most benefit from it and have the least opportunity? It's something that we're looking at very much as we go into our next phase. We are looking to a bright future, thanks to the Arts Council and continued support for our programme, hopefully right the way to 2024. We're also at a really exciting stage where in Dewsbury, we're about to take over a building, a former mill building, which will be the first time that we've got a venue, and we're just going to be spending a couple of years experimenting with that, seeing what works, inviting everybody to come into that building prior to, hopefully, a big bang development of that building through some funding to make a specific arts and cultural centre, which will really change the way in which we work. And to be honest, I'm a little bit nervous about it, because we have made a virtue out of not running an arts centre, not having to worry about venues and caretakers and security and ticketing. We've actually gone completely the other way. So a big challenge there, but I do know as well, you know, to make that successful, we want it and we need it to have genuine community ownership. And we want to find a way to monetize that ownership so that the money goes back into the community, into artists and to people creating the kind of things they want to see. So we're thinking about that very much from the post-COVID, but also from, you know, how do we create an infrastructure to support the cultural ecology that we have been able to bring into the light now. We don't want to become the building-based venue that everybody goes to. We want it to be the beacon that can keep things going out and keep people developing new opportunities. I think, Anna, is there anything final to say around how we, anything that you'd like to contribute, because you've been heavily involved in shaping all of this? Any key questions before we finally wrap up?
No, I think it's just to sort of conclude that there's been some really good links put into the chat panel. So we'll, I think you can download it yourselves if you want to, but we'll also download it, and we've got, we'll send out some connections and transcriptions as part of our thank you email. Sarah's been recording, and this will be available again if you wanted to share it more widely when we send it out as well. But no, I think it's, everyone's just saying what a pleasure it's been and how interesting it's been. And yeah, thank you for all of your contributions.
Thank you. Well, thank you again, Creative Scene team, for bringing this webinar into being. Great to see so many people. Thank you, Tracy, Jonathan, Madiha, Stephen, Len. I'm going to see Matt. Are you ready to just give us a little bit of a, this is what we've been talking about, and we will be sharing that. Can you unmute Matt, Sarah, please? Thank you. Oh, you're off again, Matt. There you go. You're here.
So yes, lots of scribbling at the moment. So a bit like can't really see them because we're in pencil, but these will all be spell checked, and and they'll all be sort of drawn in, and hopefully it'll capture the flavour of the sort of conversation. I mean, there's a lot of information. It's really fascinating listening to the discussions and what's going on. I mean, obviously, I've done a little bit of work with Creative Scene, and it's great to sort of continue that involvement. And I sort of look forward to seeing how things develop as well, and being part of that conversation, maybe. So yeah, lots of scribbles at this moment. So, but these will all be put together with the other.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Matt. And Chloe, I'm sorry, you're at the top of my screen and I forgot to thank you. And please reach out to us around the social prescribing. We're having the same problems trying to find the right person to speak to about that. So let's get our heads together on that. Thank you all. A brilliant discussion. We're going to close now, but watch out for us after a Christmas, New Year break, because we will definitely want to make this space available and continue the conversation. So thank you to everyone, and see you soon. Keep safe.